All right, good afternoon. We are going to call today's meeting of the Rules and Open Government Committee to order at 2:02 p.m. Let's start with roll.
Davis.
Here.
Jimenez.
Here.
Kamei. Here. Foley.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
We have quorum.
All right, thank you. We're going to start by reviewing the council agenda for next Tuesday, August 20th. The meeting is scheduled to start at 9:30 with a 1:30 regular session. Consent is one page, bottom page 4, top of page 5. We have an annual report, section 3.3, on advancing racial equity. 2 items around military equipment, section 4. We have item 7.1, service delivery and private competition, public-private competition for Lake Cunningham. And that is it. There is an ad sheet with one additional item. So let's see if there's any public comment.
No public comment.
Move approval.
Second.
With the ad sheet.
All right, no comments. Let's vote. Great, motion carries 5-0. Now we're on to the agenda for Tuesday, August 27th. Once again, a 9:30 closed session, 1:30 regular session. Consent starts on page 4. Continues on page 5 and ends at the top of page 6. Section 3, we have an appointment to the Board of Administration for Police and Fire Retirement Plan. We have our summer IGR report. We have taking a potential positions to take on the November 2024 state ballot measures and the resolution regarding Mwekmaloni. Section 8, we have an exempt surplus land declaration, and there is one item on land use consent that would be heard immediately after regular consent. We have any members of the public who want to speak on this item?
No public comment.
All right, do we have any questions from the council or a motion, or from the board?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, let's vote. All right, that motion carries 5-0. That brings us to our consent calendar for today's committee meeting. We have 9 items on consent today. Do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
All right, back to the committee.
Move approval. Second.
All right, let's vote. Here we go. Our fingers are hovering. All right, the motion carries 5-0. All right, the first item on our committee review today is a public records appeal from NAACP. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Zarate to introduce this item and let us know more about it.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Zarate. I'm the Director of the Office of Administration, Policy, and Intergovernmental Relations, joined by Jessica Lowry, the Open Government Manager, and Rosa Sungtatari from the City Attorney's Office. The history of the appeal before the Rules Committee is set forth in the administration's memorandum. The appeal before you involves releasing the names of the 2 officers who received certain racist text messages. One of these officers is no longer employed with the city. The other officer is still employed. Staff initially withheld both names based upon the fact that there was an active investigation into the conduct of these officers, which is required under state law. Staff recently learned that the investigation for the officer who left the city has concluded. As a result, the city released the name of that officer to the NAACP last week on August 8th, 2024.
Actually, before I begin, if the appellant is here, it's my understanding that they would go first. Okay,
Armin Isasian, if you could go ahead to the podium, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for your time, members of the committee. My name is Armin Nersessian. I'm an attorney at Fenwick & West LLP, and I'm here representing the San Jose Silicon Valley chapter of the NAACP. So our position is laid out in our letter. There have been 2 exceptions that have been raised to deny the NAACP's Public Records Act request. Neither of them apply. It's a request for names only. We're not seeking personnel records. We're not seeking records of investigation. And this is not a matter over which the city or this committee has discretion. The PRA exceptions from disclosure simply don't apply. And even if they did in the first instance, Section 832.7 of the California Penal Code requires disclosure, notwithstanding Subdivision A, Section 7923.600 of the Government Code, or any other law where there's a sustained finding that an officer made racist statements, which is the core of the allegation here, and there's been that finding. Our position is set forth in our letter. The fact that the city has disclosed one of the names does not supply a justification for withholding the other, and for that reason, the San Jose Silicon Valley chapter of the NAACP requests that this committee grant its appeal and grant its Public Records Act request. Thank you.
If I may, Rosa Sangtatari, Chief Deputy City Attorney with the City Attorney's Office. I'd just like to take this opportunity to respond to the position stated in their appeal. Many of the facts are already set forth in the administration's memo. You may be aware the text message under investigation has been released with the officers redacted. So the sole issue before you is the NAACP seeking to distinguish their request as limited to the release of the officer's name, and that being not an investigatory record. They assert that since there's been a sustained finding against former Officer McNamara that the name of the other officer being investigated should also be released under Penal Code Section 832.7B1D, which is an exception to the general prohibition against the release of officer personnel files. However, it's well established under the 2006 Copley case that even the identity of an officer is considered a personnel record that should be protected under 832.7. To release the name would cause the city to violate the penal code prohibition and undermine the integrity of an ongoing investigation. Under the Public Records Act, certain records may not be released if otherwise exempt under state and federal law. And in this instance, state law specifically prohibits it, except under very limited circumstances. Since the sustained finding involved Officer McNamara and not this officer, that exemption does not apply in this case. The cases cited by the NAACP are also inapplicable. Bond Graham versus Superior Court from 2023 involved the release of records under a specific exemption, which allows for the release of personnel records that relate to a sustained finding. And as I have indicated, this is a pending investigation. There isn't a sustained finding involving this particular officer. The second case that's cited in the letter, Becerra versus Superior Court 2020, involved a situation of whether a peace officer personnel records are protected under the Public Records Act when the Department of Justice receives these records from the agencies that employ the peace officers. This is not that type of case before you. And the reason for why an exemption doesn't apply, we've already stated. There's a pending investigation and there isn't a sustained finding. For these reasons, we recommend that the appeal be rejected.
All right, thank you. We'll start with public comment.
No other public comment.
Oh, okay, then back to the committee. Councilmember Jimenez.
Yeah, thank you for the information. I've just a few questions just to get clarity on this. Am I to assume, just based on what the city attorney's office shared, that if and when the investigation is concluded, then we would be able to release the name, or even then we would be precluded per some of the penal code and some of the other restrictions?
The penal code identifies specific exemptions, and just because the investigation is concluded doesn't necessarily mean that the information would be released. It depends on whether it meets those exemptions.
Okay, all right. The issue of sustained findings, if there were sustained, would there need to be sustained findings against the officer that was the recipient of some of the texts from McNamara, the one that they seek to be disclosed? Would there need to be sustained findings against that officer in order would that allow us to then release the name of that officer, or even then it would need to fall under some of the exemptions, or would that be one of the exemptions?
So it would have to be a sustained finding against the officer that is under investigation, and it would depend on the type of sustained finding.
Okay. So if the sustained findings, if there are sustained findings against McNamara, and there are certain sustained findings, and that theoretically could allow us to then release the name of the officer that received the text from McNamara. Is that?
So the pending investigation involves an officer that received the text. So until that investigation is concluded, and depending on the nature of the conclusion of it, it may or may not be released under the penal code.
Okay. Okay. And I apologize, I think I explained it wrong, but thank you for clarifying that. Because obviously there's still an open case, if you will, against McNamara, but sort of was jumbling those two together. But okay, those are my questions. I personally am going to be supporting the denial of the appeal, given some of the restrictions that we have as it relates to the release of the names. But I would just say that I think for me, on issues related to public safety, especially around this particular case, I think we should strive to be as open as possible with the community, because that is what they seek. But given that our hands are tied because of the penal code and other regulations and policies, that obviously we shouldn't move forward with it at this time. But I appreciate the gentleman and the NAACP more generally for putting in the request and going down this route, as I know they typically try to do their best to shed light on some of the issues that plague our community. So, thank you.
All right, Vice Mayor Kamei.
Thank you. I was just curious, I know that it sounds like it's falling into more personnel issues, and I understand that. What is the time frame in terms of looking at the investigation? Is it like 6 months from now, or because I think that it would be good for the public to know that yes, we have an investigation going on, it's happening, and it may or may not be at a point where you could disclose the information, but you know, if there's a time frame in which the community would know the outcome of whatever investigation it is going to be.
I'm not privy to that information, and I'm not sure Sarah is, but I'll defer to her.
I'm also not privy to the investigation or a timeline related to it.
Okay. Do these things happen quickly, or do they happen, I mean, do investigations happen quickly, or do they happen, like, does it take years? Or, I mean, I know that there's perhaps complexity, but I'm just wondering, how long do these things take?
I think depending on the case and how many jurisdictions are involved, investigations can happen relatively quickly or take a longer period of time than we would all like. think what we can commit to, since it is a personnel and ongoing matter, we can update you guys in closed session on where that is, I think is most appropriate.
That would be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, I didn't hear a motion yet, so I had to support. Oh, go ahead, Councilmember Jimenez.
That was a very good question. I forgot to ask that question about the timeline because I was curious about that as well. Happy to learn that we'll learn about it in closed session. What I'm curious about is the investigation for this particular officer whose name we are not disclosing, how much of it is it tracking sort of the existing sort of case against McNamara and some of the other stuff? Is that maybe, I don't know if I'm getting too much in the weeds, so stop me if I am. But I mean, I guess should we expect that the broader case against the officer who's, I guess, I don't know did the DA file charge? I'm trying to remember what's public.
I think I am definitely not in a position today to answer any questions on the investigation
Okay, no problem.
itself. We're letting that play out, and I
Okay.
have a very superficial level of understanding of where that is and those things, but I think most of those questions are probably appropriate in closed session.
So I would say when it comes back to closed session, it would be helpful to understand how much, or if this particular investigation is still going on internally, how much that's tracking the external sort of broader case that's going on related to the other officer. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And I've always been, over my years of service and these kinds of discussions, very sensitive to public release of private personnel information until warranted. And certainly until an investigation sustains a finding, it's in my mind inappropriate to be giving out personnel information that could, where it's when it's not time for the public to have that information. It's important to be transparent about the process that the city and the organization is following, and that we are following a process that is well documented and laid out, and we follow all applicable laws. But it's also important to make sure that we respect the privacy needs of individuals until such time as there's something to report. So I'm fully supportive of the staff recommendation. Is there a motion from a member of the committee?
A motion to deny the appeal.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other comment before we move to a vote?
Are we doing the partial deny as staff?
It's staff recommendation, which was the
Staff
partial.
recommendation is what the motion would be.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. Okay, then let's vote on it. All right, the motion carries 5-0. Thank you for being here, and thank you, staff, for the presentation and information. We have another item today. This is our development process and CEQA improvements, a memo from Mayor Councilmember Jimenez, Councilmember Davis. I think we're going to start with Councilmember Jimenez giving a brief introduction before we go to public comment.
Yeah, thank you. There's a memorandum before us from the mayor, myself, and Councilmember Davis. Councilmember Davis and I were part of the transition committee on permitting and planning it seems like forever ago, but about a year or so, 2 years ago almost. And we had at that time, we had a lot of discussions with developers around the city. And part of the things that arose out of some of those discussions is thinking about the impact that CEQA has on the timelines for development and approvals and such. And while we recognize that CEQA is an important and valuable tool for identifying and mitigating negative impacts to the environment, the process is often complex, lengthy, and costly. And so part of the reason for this memo is that we believe the council would benefit, and the committee, CED, who we're directing to send this to, would benefit from a greater understanding of the CEQA process, including what points of discretion or when determining if a project is exempt. Additionally, trying to understand the risk aversion or risk tolerance of the city during the environmental review, because it's quite possible some projects don't need to go through as rigorous a review as others. And really the point of this is try to think about how we can streamline the development of some of these projects, especially housing projects that we want to see come online. And so we're sending, in approving this today, we're sending staff out to do a workload analysis that we hope they bring back in relatively short amount of time, a week or two. And also the other part of the recommendation, number 2 specifically, is to really look at the model in which we fund the planning department. And currently they operate under a model of cost recovery, so they need to effectively bill for every action or thing that they do, but it doesn't account for some of the other variety of things that they address, such as council sort of questions and concerns, or even public sort of interaction. And so we know that not every city in our area operates under this model, and they function very well in many circumstances. And so part of the direction is also to get a MBA in the next budget cycle, really looking at the cost recovery model and hopefully starting to transition away from the 100% cost recovery model to an alternative that is more sustainable and more productive to get more projects off the ground. So that is the memorandum. Appreciate a second, or I'll make a motion to accept the memorandum and send it off to staff to do a cost or a workload analysis.
Okay, thank you. Before we continue with the discussion in the committee, let's go to public comment.
Eric and Matthew, please go ahead and make your way to the podium.
Can I hand these to the dais for the 5 members, please? No, just the members of the committee. Yeah, Lee has too much to read. Good afternoon, Chair Cohen, members of the committee. My name is Eric Schoenauer. This is obviously a topic of interest to me. First of all, I want to thank Council Members Davis and Jimenez and Mayor Mahan for keeping the focus on this topic. It's important to the economic well-being of the city. The first thing I want to emphasize is that none of what we, including those of us in the development business, talk about for streamlining the CEQA process is reducing the protection of the environment. None of this. This is all about getting rid of process that accomplishes nothing, because 95 or more % of the CEQA process in an urban city like San Jose is process for the sake of process. It's not to identify or solve any environmental problem. What I handed out to you, because this work is underway, and I want to make sure that we're not crossing paths. So what I handed out to you is a document from the planning department, and the planning department had a brainstorming session in the development review committee of the community. These are where developers and development interests come in. And we brainstormed the problems and ideas for improvements. And these are architects, civil engineers, consultants like myself that interact with the process every day. And so this is a laundry list of all the things that came up in the first brainstorming session. And I highlighted in orange the ones associated with the topic today, which is CEQA process improvement and city attorney's involvement in that. I believe the city could chop 2 to 4 months off the process if the planning department would get out of its reliance on the city attorney to look at every document, every sentence, every word. It just bogs down the process and results in nothing helpful.
Good afternoon, Matthew Reed from Silicon Valley at Home. It's nice to see you all this morning. Let me just say, as you know, in the last 24 hours, we've had a significant setback with the movement forward of the regional bond. And I just wanted to acknowledge the effort and commitment that you all had made to that effort and voice our appreciation. And let you know that problem is still there and the solutions will still be coming. I'm really pleased to be here to support this memo. We at SV at Home don't always get the opportunity to weigh in on what is generally the market side of the production landscape, but it's super important to us and it's super important to the city, and so I'm pleased to be here in support of this. CEQA is complicated. I think, as Mr. Schoenauer pointed out, sometimes it gets overly complicated. And I think with the leadership of Councilmember Jimenez and Councilmember Davis, the support of the mayor, looking at ways that the city can do what it can to make its processes and the checklist of things that we need to do, the design guidelines, all of these pieces that affect development. How can we really understand how they all fit together to make things feasible or not in the city? So I really appreciate that. I know it's been a multi-year process to keep this on the table, and so I'm pleased to see this going forward. I would just say in 11 seconds, there is research that shows that San Jose is significantly less likely to issue negative declarations on.
Back to the committee.
Thank you. Go to members of the committee. We'll start with Vice Mayor.
Thank you. And thank you to the mayor, Councilmember Jimenez, and Councilmember Davis for working on this. This is critically important. I think that in the long run, it's really going to be beneficial to us in our city. One of the things that I was going to ask the maker of the motion is if we could, I wanted to add a little friendly amendment because we're right now just beginning our Saratoga Urban Village process, and it's been budgeted, and I thought, well, it might be a good example to use in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and I would like to add that in terms of implementing it. So in your item under 1C, where you talk about the downtown and urban villages, I would respectfully ask if we would add with the Saratoga Urban Village planning process currently budgeted for and underway, so that it could be like an example. I don't know if there are other urban villages happening, but since it's just starting, it would be at least a way to get it going. And I mean, it's just an example of an urban village that, I mean, there may be others, but that's the one that I know.
Just to clarify, are you saying because that's actively moving sort of through the pipeline to use that as a test case?
Yes.
To see how?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you cited specifically C, which I think is tied to what Eric was saying is, and I'll just read it briefly, opportunities for the Planning, Building, Code Enforcement Department to engage with the City Attorney's Office to further streamline the CEQA process for projects, including reducing thresholds. I mean, I don't see an issue with that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just adding where at the end of the sentence you say downtown and urban villages would be with, see, what did I have here? With the Saratoga Urban Village planning process that is currently budgeted and is underway. I mean, that is just starting right now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing that I would say is, I mean, it does say downtown and urban villages. I mean, just even with mentioning urban villages, I take that to mean inclusive of the Saratoga Urban Village. And I'm not, I think part of what C is just frankly just clearing up the communication between the departments, whether it be planning staff, city attorney's office, and so I'm happy to add that. And then what I would say is, when the staff does the workload analysis, they can bring us back their ideas as to how that works. I would also say that if you're, and this may go maybe contrary to accepting the friendly amendment, but I would say that you being very involved in that project, you can also watch, irrespective of what happens here, you can watch it very closely and, quite frankly, bring together the city attorney's office and planning staff yourself to also make sure you're trying to shepherd that through to figure out what those issues are too. But
yeah, I guess one of the things that I find is that the more clear you are, the better the outcomes, right? And because it's sort of generic saying, oh, downtown and urban village, I don't want them to say, oh, well, that's later, right? Yeah. When this is just beginning now. I mean, we're just going to launch it, and it's beginning now, so it could be a great test case to be able to accelerate, because these things I know take time, I know take money, but I also think that if we could if we could use this opportunity to learn from it and say, hey, these are the things that work, these are the things that don't work, and we're going to move it forward starting from right now.
Vice Mayor, would you be okay if at the end, or just adding a brief sentence there, is explore using the Saratoga Urban
That's
Village as a
fine.
test case?
That's fine.
And then we'll see what the staff says when they bring
Yeah.
it back in a week or two?
That's fine.
Yeah. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Deb is okay? Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you.
No, Deb.
Okay with the seconder then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we're in the exploratory stages about what this streamlined process would look like, so we may be premature to be able to apply it to a project right now, but certainly keep in mind what projects are coming as we get to the point at which we can begin testing a streamlined process. Okay, Councilmember Foley.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Jimenez and Councilmember Davis and the mayor for bringing this forward. We've been talking about streamlining CEQA for years. In fact, I had it on the priority list in my first year of council, and it kind of didn't go anywhere. So I'm glad to see that that transition committee is staying connected to this issue and bringing this forward. I think that's really important. It's critical that we continue to look at this and that we get out of the way, get out of our own way of development if it doesn't add anything to the process or benefit anyone in the long run. So, and since this is coming, the way I read this is that this is, you're authorizing a presentation to come to CED, which is theoretically the committee I will chair next year, and in the second quarter, and which is great. I think it's really, the sooner the better. I know it will take time to study this issue. I'm not sure we can attach it yet to a specific property, or project, but if that's possible, that's great too. We just really need to analyze the issue and then get out of our way. I do have two questions because there is budgetary issues in this related to next year's budget. So when I first read it initially, the first portion of it, I thought, oh, there's a budget issue here. When's that coming in? But you've taken that into consideration. So I'm wondering if the time frame is aggressive enough. If there is a budget item that comes to council, we would need to see this at CED at the first part of the quarter and not the second part of the quarter. So just to keep that in mind as staff is looking at this, that when it does come to CED, it really needs to be more like March or February. Well, or March, because we meet at the end of the month.
Yeah, probably needs to be January, especially as you
probably,
go into,
you're right.
Especially as you go into priority setting, to be overly transparent with the committee. It was our intention this morning to say, this is great, we're going to do this anyway, because we are actually in the work plan for the fall, scheduled to come forward to your committee in January with an update on CEQA reform and that work. In looking at it today with staff, I requested an additional week to really look at that exact issue of timing, because I do think there's budget implications, and I think Chris and that team are very focused on the implementation of the audit recommendations around CEQA and that coming forward in January. So I wanted to better understand if they pivot to some of this, what happens with that. So I think Rosalind and I needed a little bit of time with Chris through the week, but you're trying to get at the same question we were, is how do we do this in a timely manner that allows us to continue to make those changes, but also help inform the budget process,
right?
Specifically around priority setting.
The mayor's budget process, right? So thank you, Lee. I wonder if I could ask for a friendly amendment then, instead of the no later than second quarter 2025. I'm going to push staff on this a little bit and say no later than January 2025.
I would say that I'm interested in doing it as soon as possible. And so
Okay.
this was all done in contact and communication with staff, but I'm happy to insert that, and then when they bring back the workload analysis, they can.
Okay.
Yes, but I do want to, it probably will mean that we are on that workload analysis saying that we are putting other things aside so that we are transparent of what that work is.
I guess it depends on what those things are.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so it's our job to kind of show you what that
Yeah.
is.
Okay. Thank you.
I accept.
And there's an opportunity to amend, when this comes back to the rules, either a week or two from now, to amend the timing on here based on what the workload analysis
Sure.
says. All right, Councilmember Davis.
Yeah, thank you. I do really want to know what those trade-offs are, and I just want to make sure while this work is happening that we're able to do the policy work that we need to do to be ready for 2026. And I know that sounds like it's a far time away, but our policy work needs to be done in early 2025 so that we can get out the word that our policies have changed and that the private businesses and everything are able to take advantage of our new policies and be able to plan for all the events that are starting in February of 2026. So I just want to be clear about that, and I hope that we'll be clear about the trade-offs that we're talking about. And then I did want to thank Councilmember Foley. There are two of, we're in the Brown Act, and we couldn't add you to the Brown Act because of this committee. So I appreciate your comments in public so that we can know what you're thinking as the head of that committee. Normally, you would be in our Brown Act, but of course we couldn't do that because we had a pre-existing Brown Act. So I really want to thank you for being very clear with us about what's on the docket for the CED committee.
Thank you. Councilmember Menez, I saw your hand up before. Did you still want to say anything else? Okay. I'll just add some comments myself. While I understand there's trade-offs, and I know that there's some things that we don't want to trade off, this to me seems like one of the most important things that we could be doing, and the sooner the better on getting this done. And I've been saying that one of my priorities for the next term, starting next January, is to work on this issue and streamlining our planning process, because what I've heard from the development community, many people I've talked to across the spectrum, is that the most effective thing we can do is to streamline our planning process. When we debate fees and charges and what kind of things we can do to make things more attractive, all those things are far less effective than this kind of reform. And so this reform is the most important thing. And then we wouldn't have to have those regular discussions about incentives and changing incentives. So I'm happy to receive the baton that will be passed along with Councilmember Foley, then going forward to continue to move this forward as a priority for me and for the council in the years ahead. So I appreciate that. As we do this analysis, I would just suggest that there's talk here about in the MBA about how to shift from this fully cost recovery model to other models. And as part of that analysis, I just want to make sure it includes what the benefits are financially to the city to speeding up development and getting more development done, because it's not just a question of reducing what comes into to our fund to pay for services, but I imagine we will be able to pay for services better the more development we get. So that ought to be part of that analysis, is that kind of, what benefits do we get as we get more development going sooner and faster? So I just wanted to make that comment. All right, now, Councilmember Menez, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight something you said, that there has often been conversations as it relates to the development space about incentives, and those oftentimes have been controversial conversations up here. But my office, Lucas in my office, who I want to thank for doing a lot of this work, is we've often wondered, and this memo is sort of a byproduct of this, is what can we do internally via the processes that we have to help facilitate development, rather than having to have those difficult conversations about public, trade-offs on incentives and things of that nature that can be more divisive. And so these are, what's in this memo, I think, are some of the levers that we've identified that we can pull that I think are going to have the potential to have significant positive impact to getting developments out of the ground. And so I just wanted to highlight that. That's very important.
Yep, appreciate that. All right, unless there's any other comments, we'll move to a vote. Let's go ahead. All right, the motion carries 5-0. I look forward to hearing the next step in the process. Turn off my mic. That brings us to our last item, which is open forum.
Gail, Jalea, and Richard, please go ahead and make your way to the podium.
Well, good afternoon. I'm here because I want this to go on the record. Last Thursday, there was something happened at one of my camps at Great Oaks that San Jose Beautify people, the staff from San Jose Beautify, took 2 tents down and took all the belongings of people living in that tent. There was no reason for Beautify to do that. These people live at Great Oaks. They have a nice, clean camp. Jimenez, Sergio, you've been to that camp. It's probably the best clean camp in San Jose. They went in and took a tent down and took the belongings. Where are the belongings? Probably in the trash. I called Beautify yesterday morning to find out. They didn't call me back till this morning. The people behind me, they've called Beautify 2 or 3 times. Beautify never called back. Also, one of the things Beautify did is take a chest that was outside of the tent with a gentleman helping his brother. He came back. They put the chest in their truck. He said, "No, that's mine. I've had it for 3 years." The policeman said, "Go talk to the city manager." And they took the chest. They could have given the chest. I've always been supportive of San Jose Beautify. I've said it many times. I'm so disappointed. They took people's stuff. What did they have? Nothing. There was no reason. This was a cleanup. And they go there. They have good relationships, supposedly, with the people. They go there once a week and clean up. You've seen where they put their trash. Somebody has to pay for this. This is not right. And they're lucky they have a big mouth like me to support them. How many times has this happened to other unhoused people? Thank you.
On your paper that you hang up for the Beautify, you say this is not an abatement. But if you read further down, you will see that it says the city has declared this to be abandoned, an abatement, okay? That the chest that they took that was mine was well over 200 years old. And they had no reason to take it. I was still moving into my tent. And they don't, when they take our stuff, nobody takes an inventory of what they're taking. Nobody gives us a claim number to where we can go back and get it. How are we supposed to go and get it? That's all I have to say.
Good afternoon. I'm the other person that they took stuff from the camp. I don't think it was fair. I don't. They don't have a reason. I called Beautify numerous times yesterday, and I tried to call this morning before we came. I didn't get an answer or a reply. I just hope something is done because I lost everything. Shoes, clothes, everything. Everything. And if they can tell me the honest reason why they did it, maybe I'll be understanding. But they can't. I don't think it was fair. I don't. And I hope something is done about it, please.
Back to the committee.
We're not going to have comment, but thank you for your comments, and we'll certainly, I think some of us want to find out more about what happened and make sure that people get help that they need. Thank you for coming and making comment. Our meeting is adjourned at 2:46 p.m.